last desperate days of World War II, Nazi troops scrambled to dispose of mysterious crates on a dark, remote Austrian lake. What did they hold? Records of the regime's most horrible acts? Stolen treasure? Nazi gold? These secrets would remain hidden for decades, until explorers began to probe the depths. In their ongoing search, they have dredged up mementos of a sinister past and discovered that the truth is as murky as the waters that cloak the mystery of Lake Toplitz. On the surface, Austria's Lake Toplitz seems peaceful and pristine. But during the Second World War, it became known as the Devil's Dumping Ground. Today, the mysteries that have shrouded the lake are coming to light. For more than 20 years, German biologist and documentary filmmaker Hans Fricke has been exploring the Alpine lakes. His original focus was to study the ecology of these deep bodies of water. Fricke and his submarine pilot, Jürgen Schauer, have conducted underwater research all around the globe on behalf of the Max Planck Institute. Their research has been successful, making headlines with numerous discoveries. But of all their search sites, they are continually drawn to Lake Toplitz. Just 3 hours by car from Munich, it's one of the more isolated lakes in Austria. Operating a submersible in Lake Toplitz poses numerous challenges for Fricke and Schauer. After only a few meters, the water grows completely dark. They have to remain on constant watch for sunken logs and hidden boulders that can snag or puncture the sub. Beyond a depth of 16 meters, the oxygen disappears and life fades. A soup of naturally occurring toxic hydrogen sulfide swirls in the deep, poisonous to most life. The lake drops to a depth of over 100 meters. The submarine was built for deep ocean exploration, so it can withstand pressures much greater than the 4,000 tons exerted at this depth. From inside the plexiglass port, Fricke and his pilot gain a view onto a realm no other human has seen before. It is one in a long string of firsts for Fricke. Down here, microorganisms build fantastic structures. But as he stirs up the sediment on the bottom, Fricke unleashes a firestorm on land. To his amazement, Fricke discovers that his research threatens powerful people who want to keep the secrets of Lake Toplitz hidden.
When we first explored the lake in 1983, we weren't too interested in its Nazi past. So we were very surprised to be attacked in the press by right-wing extremists after those initial dives. It was especially difficult and frustrating for us because we are marine biologists, more interested in the science than history. As time went on, the history of the lake began to interest me, and I began to chase the legends and myths. I wanted to know if the mysterious stories were true. It's taken me over 20 years to understand what happened here.
The mist-shrouded mountains of Austria and southern Germany made an ideal haven for the Nazis to carry out acts they wanted to keep from the public eye. During the last days of the war, the Nazis transported much of what they deemed valuable or incriminating to the Alpine stronghold. Gold from the German Reichsbank was hidden away here, and evidence of some of the Reich's more sinister deeds was sunk in the lakes. Fricke soon discovered why Lake Toplitz has been called the Devil's Dumping Ground. Littered along the bottom lie cases of military supplies, rockets, mines and explosives. And then Fricke's lights catch an extraordinary sight. English pound notes. Cases of banknotes. So many, the submarine is literally swimming in money. Fricke's discovery would alter the course of his own life, leading him away from biology into a decades-long investigation of Nazi secrets that lie at the bottom of the lake. In the mountains of Austria, a large lake known as the Devil's Dumping Ground is believed to contain clues to the final days of the Nazi Reich. While exploring the lake, German biologist Hans Fricke stumbled upon thousands of British pounds. But he's not the first to uncover the banknotes. In 1959, the German magazine Stern underwrote a large-scale salvage operation on Lake Toplitz. A reporter was investigating stories from a book written by Dr. Wilhelm Höttl, a high-ranking SS officer. The operation dredged up some pound notes from the lake bottom. It created a sensation and further exploration. It became clear that rumors of a Nazi program, codenamed Operation Bernhard, were true. It was the biggest case of counterfeiting in history. The Germans printed 130 million English pounds, at the time roughly 1/3 of the entire British money supply. The counterfeit notes caught the British by surprise, according to John Keyworth of the Bank of England.
It wasn't until 1942 that Operation Bernhard notes first appeared here. They were very good, and they passed the first check in the bank. They came through, they were passed as genuine, and at that time what happened with banknotes was that they were marked off in a ledger, in other words, crossed off. And the key to that was the number. So when a £5 note came in, the £5 note ledger was taken out, the number was looked up. If it was there and unmarked, it was crossed off. It turned out that of these 8 notes, all of them had already been crossed off in the ledger. So, of course, alarm bells started to ring, and, of course, on closer examination, it was realized that they were forgeries.
For 15 days that summer, the salvage team pulled thousands of forged pound notes out of the lake. More than 20 years later, it was clear to Hans Fricke that much had been left on the bottom. As a documentary filmmaker, he recorded everything.
When we were making the first dive, we didn't really expect to find as much as we did. We expected to discover perhaps a few war relics or even a few British pound notes. But overall, we were extremely surprised when we found so much.
Fricke soon came across other, more menacing relics of the war. Huge aircraft floats had been submerged and abandoned. With the help of Austrian divers trained in handling explosives, Fricke salvaged other mysterious equipment. They removed large raft pontoons, as well as rockets, bombs and mines. Fricke determined that the weapons had been built for the German Navy. Lake Toplitz had been a testing ground for naval research and was ideal for experimenting with underwater explosives and devices for their nearby research institute. The Austrian salvage operation brought in an expert team and heavy lifting equipment. They pulled several giant, unarmed mines from the bottom. It seemed as if the dark mysteries that clouded Lake Toplitz might finally be revealed. Forged British banknotes rose to the surface, snowy white, preserved in the oxygen-free environment of the lake bottom. The ink on this note had barely faded after 40 years in the water. Millions of pounds worth of counterfeit money was taken away for safekeeping. Hans Fricker began to search for connections between the forged banknotes and the Navy Research Institute.
It seems the counterfeit banknotes and Research Institute have nothing in common. However, both functioned as weapons during the war. The counterfeit money was used in Hitler's paper war, and the chemical and physical research was used for improving submarine warfare. Both did have something in common. They had to vanish into the lake at the end of the war.
Fricker turned his attention from the lake's biology to its man-made artifacts. Searching for clues in the heavy sediment was a challenge. But he discovered that the German Navy had been developing new weapons. An underwater mine with a pressure fuse, and a rocket that could be fired underwater to hit targets on the surface. The Navy weapons program consumed vast amounts of equipment and explosives. Wartime labor was often supplied by workers in concentration camps, such as at Sachsenhausen near Berlin. It was here that the counterfeit money was printed. In blocks 18 and 19, prisoners, mostly Jews, were forced to work on the biggest counterfeiting operation in history. Sachsenhausen was primarily an extermination camp. By the time of its liberation, as many as 100,000 people died here. The print shop was isolated from the rest of the camp, and inmates here were treated slightly better. Nevertheless, they knew they shared a common fate with the other prisoners. One of the inmates was Jack Plappler. He was brought to the camp at the age of 18, simply because he was a Jew. Plappler was the youngest in the counterfeiting block, a house painter by trade. Others had more expertise: printers, graphic designers, typographers. At the beginning, in 1942, there were 26 workers in the barracks. 2 years later, 140 men were working on the printing presses. Their task, to produce flawless 5, 10, 20 and 50-pound notes. The Nazis' Foreign Intelligence Service was in desperate need of foreign currency, and the banknotes had to be flawless forgeries, as Jack Plappler remembers.
In each block, there were 2 halls. The printing shop was situated in the front hall. In the second hall, most of the inmates sat at a long table and had the task of somehow making the newly printed banknotes and paper look old and grubby. They tried to make the banknotes look old by using dust or dirt. The banknotes were not cut with scissors, but torn along the edge of a ruler. My particular task was on the printing machine, known as the saucepan. I had to see to it that the numbers here on these banknotes were always printed in sequence and with consecutive numbers.
Wir hatten natürlich immer die Hoffnung, und wir waren ja sogenannte alte Lagerhasen.
We were so-called old hands in the camp, and were clever enough to realize that if this went on for a long time, we were no longer needed. We would, of course, be killed immediately, based on what we knew. Our only hope was that the war would end overnight, and that we would or could then be saved.
At Sachsenhausen, the SS carried out summary executions as part of their cruel daily routine. Who were these men who held Jack Plappler's and the other inmates' lives in their hands? Hans Fricker spent years tracking them down and convinced a key figure to be interviewed.
We located Bernhard Krüger in a rather adventurous manner. My friend had met Krüger's daughter in South Africa, and that was how we got to her father. I met Bernhard Krüger for the very first time in a restaurant near the main railway station in Hamburg, in a room right at the back of the restaurant. On that day, Krüger explained to us how he had printed his banknotes and what secret markings were incorporated in them.
Bernhard Krüger ran the counterfeiting operation and named it after himself.
Wenn man die fälscht. Ja. Also ich muss der Bank von England schon ein Lob machen, alleine schon die Darstellung des Druckes.
Yes, I have to praise the Bank of England for the way the print is laid out and the security through a laid and stamped watermark. You can see it here. It's not a normal watermark. It's covered by the plate number. And the edges are not flat. They are similar to the edges of a counterfeit, but not as sharp. They have not been cut. Then, on top of the ornament is an end-to-end security strip as an added security feature, and the text layout on different kinds of issue. Because the note is only printed on one side, this main security feature is the watermark. To forge that, you need professionals, people who know the business.
Krüger held an important position in the Nazi propaganda machine, responsible for passports, ink and documents. His commanding officer was Heinrich Himmler, the propaganda minister. They answered to just one man, Adolf Hitler. The counterfeit money scheme was one weapon the Nazis hoped would bring Great Britain to its knees. Another was the German U-boat. Early in the war, U-boats stalked the Atlantic, threatening to starve Britain. But the Allies countered with armed convoys, aerial patrols and sonar. Contrary to German propaganda films, Allied efforts decimated the U-boat fleet. Admiral Dönitz, commander of the German Navy, knew the battle was lost unless the experts at Lake Toplitz could develop new, more deadly weapons. Chemists and physicists worked around the clock to build an underwater rocket. 50 years later, Hans Fricker found their plans in the archives of the Royal Navy in London. They revealed that the researchers were trying to develop highly accurate launching rigs and studied the physics of underwater rocket propulsion. Fricker also came across old photos showing proud researchers at Lake Toplitz with the first test rockets. At the bottom of the lake, Fricker uncovered spent rockets. And he discovered one of the launch rigs that the Germans planned to load onto their U-boats. The frame was suspended 80 to 90 meters below the surface and was controlled with chain pulleys. The trials at Lake Toplitz led to the Americans later developing their own Polaris rocket. Launched from underwater, it can hit targets hundreds of kilometers away. Unlike the Polaris, the German rocket never worked properly. The only field test took place in the Baltic Sea, and ended in an explosion that almost sank the submarine. The pressure grew on the counterfeiting operation to speed up production. By early 1945, the noose was tightening around Germany. The Soviets crossed the Oder River on the Polish-German border and marched into the German homeland. German defenses were collapsing in the face of a withering assault. The Soviet armies circled around Berlin to cut it off, and the Nazis raced to save what they could. The counterfeiting operation in Sachsenhausen was moved in February. All of the prisoners and the entire counterfeiting workshop were transported south by train toward the mountain stronghold. Anything the Nazis valued that could be carted from Berlin, including the Reichsbank gold, was supposed to disappear into the mountains. The counterfeit operation set off for Dresden, then via Prague to Mauthausen. But nowhere was safe, with Allied planes controlling the skies. They attacked the convoys traveling south, including the prisoners from Sachsenhausen.
On a country road, American planes flew over and suddenly began to fire on us.
The prisoners' ordeal finally ended when they walked to Redelsip, a labor camp near Salzburg. SS troops continued on with the counterfeit banknotes. Their orders were to transport the fake notes deeper into the mountains, but they became lost along the way. They stumbled upon the Navy Research Institute, just a few kilometers from Lake Toplitz, and found it nearly abandoned. On a cold night in May 1945, with the war just days from being over, the SS officers decided they had to dispose of the counterfeit banknotes. They opted not to burn all the paper, fearing some of the evidence would blow away or survive. Decided to dump it all in the lake. There were so many crates, it took 2 full days to sink them all. While the Nazis' dreams of victory were sinking, Jack Plappler and the other concentration camp prisoners began to hope for freedom. As the Soviets and Allies closed in on the remnants of Nazi forces, SS troops dumped millions of pounds of forged British banknotes into Lake Toplitz. Only kilometers away, concentration camp prisoners who had been forced to produce the notes were about to be freed.
I remember it was around midday when we heard the American tanks rolling in. It's hard to imagine the state in which they found us. The roads in the camp were scattered with dead and exhausted inmates. The Americans came in and liberated us.
All the prisoners who had been forced to work on Operation Bernhard escaped alive. Allied fears of a Nazi last stand in the mountains never materialized. The Americans met very little resistance. Almost all of the Germans quickly surrendered. The war in Europe was finally over. While they didn't find bunkers and hidden defenses, the Americans uncovered trainloads of stolen art and treasure. The Nazis had hoped to hide it away in the Alpine stronghold. Years later, in 1987, Hans Fricke agreed to a strange reunion at Lake Toplitz. Nazi master forger Bernhard Kruger wanted to take a final look at his work. And Fricker wanted to make another dive in search of more clues about Lake Toplitz's history. This was the first time Bernhard Kruger came to Lake Toplitz. But 83 years old and nearing the end of his life, he felt drawn to the site. The Allies considered Kruger a key player in the counterfeiting scheme. But Kruger saw himself as just a small cog in the wheel, even though the code name for the operation was his own.
Excellent. Quite excellent. It hasn't rotted, it's only dirty. You could use it immediately.
Kruger worked closely with the head of Nazi foreign intelligence, but only rarely did he find out how some of the forged money was used.
Once in Pergauer Straße, I was shown a chest full of coins. Coins in different currencies. Commemorative coins and everything. I also saw other valuables such as necklaces and bracelets, which I suppose can be regarded as proceeds from the counterfeit money. But the banknotes were mainly used for intelligent purposes to finance agents and pay bribes, including a valet of the British ambassador in Ankara, who became well known in a book after the war.
Kruger had little concern for the prisoners who worked as slaves, constantly fearing for their lives.
On the whole, I'm quite content. The inmates, who were secretly concerned for their lives, achieved their freedom through Operation Bernhard. When I sit here today in front of these chests on the bottom of Lake Toplitz, I feel very moved again, and I can't help but remember the operation. Firstly, its success in the initial phases, and secondly, that it helped save the lives of the inmates.
Kruger felt he'd carried out his duty to the Führer and had done nothing wrong. In his version of events, he was the one who suffered.
Never in my life did I expect to have an opportunity to see these banknotes again. It seems Operation Bernhard has been trying to catch up with me all this time. I'm pleased it turned out that way. But what did I do? After the war, they treated me like dirt.
Bernhard Kruger died in 1989. He never expressed regret and pitied himself more than the concentration camp inmates. He went to his grave, proud of his work. Not all of Kruger's counterfeit money ended up at the bottom of the lake. Some of it was smuggled from Berlin to Murano in northern Italy, and from there to all corners of Europe. After the war, Nazi criminals used forged pound notes to finance their escapes. Friedrich Schwendt, the man responsible for distributing the money, fled to South America. In 1959, a Stern magazine reporter found him in Peru, where the German embassy had issued him a passport in the name of Federico Schwendt. He reportedly put counterfeit banknotes worth approximately 140 million Reichsmark into circulation. Schwendt used counterfeit money to pay spies. The most famous, known as Cicero, received over £300,000 for spying on the British ambassador in Ankara, Turkey. Schwendt also deposited counterfeit money into Swiss bank accounts. What happened to these accounts remains a mystery to this day. What would have happened to the British economy if the Germans had put all of the counterfeit money into circulation? The Bank of England's John Keyworth thinks it would have been calamitous.
The effect could have been quite disastrous, because what it would have meant would be that people would have lost confidence in the pound sterling, and it would have, the sort of cash economy, which was a very large part of the economy at the time, fewer people then had bank accounts, had checks and so on, and most people operated with cash. A lot of people were paid in cash, weekly or monthly even. And what it would have meant was that the cash economy would have ground to a halt for a while until the forged notes were disentangled from the system.
An economic catastrophe was averted, but even now, the Bank of England refuses to release figures on how much counterfeit money found its way into the system. The veil of mystery at Lake Toplitz lifts slowly. For a long time after the war, rumors, lies, and legends seem to swirl around the lake. One recurring story told of how the Nazis sank gold beneath its waters. There are frequent reports of divers slipping into the lake under the cover of night. But the lake is a dangerous place for treasure seekers. Sheer cliffs make much of the lake inaccessible, and the steep rock face drops straight to the bottom. Fallen trees form a dangerous, tangled maze. At the foot of the wall, large rocks lie strewn on the bottom. In the course of his research, Professor Fricke tracked down a letter that described the source of these boulders. After sinking all the things I was ordered to, I detonated about 30,000 cubic meters of the rock face. And so where the gold or other crates lie, the bed of the lake is only 94 and no longer 107 meters deep. These lines were written in 1972 by a former SS soldier. Fricke finds that the huge sediment-covered rocks won't budge, leaving no chance to uncover what lies beneath them. But then Fricke makes another intriguing discovery. It's a small metal crate with mountings, different from others he's found on the bottom. On an earlier dive, Fricke came upon this larger container at the same site. Riddled on one side with bullet holes, cartridges lay on the inside. It had been shot at from close range. On the outside, Fricke found a promising plaque. It read, "The Serbian Merchant Bank." Fricke thought both containers might have been linked to the death of a 19-year-old German, Adolf Egner.
We have a Serbian bank container with bullet holes that are so high up that it must have been full. We find it with the help of the Austrian authorities. It was empty. In the post-war era, many diving operations were carried out in the same location, involving American, British, and even Russian secret services. And the body of Egner was also recovered from here.
On the night of October the 6th, 1963, Egner and a former SS man rowed out onto Lake Toplitz. The SS man directed Egner, telling him where to dive. Was his goal to eliminate Nazi evidence, or was he in search of Serbian gold? Attached to a safety line, Egner descended to 60 meters, much too deep for an inexperienced diver. At some point, he grew disoriented or ran out of air. Adolf Egner, failed to surface. Egner's companions, SS men from the Nazi intelligence service, reported the accident 20 hours later, but only after they'd returned to Munich. Georg Freiberger, Dr. Karl-Heinz Schmidt, and Gottfried Oswald were sentenced to 5 months parole for involuntary manslaughter. They never revealed what they hoped to find when they sent Egner down into the lake. Hans Fricke hopes to find what Egner was looking for. He's the first person granted permission to dive at this spot since the tragedy in 1963. The container lies more than 80 meters below the surface. Fricke wants to know where the container came from, what could it hold, and why was it dumped here? The container could have come from one of the many convoys that passed nearby. The crate is heavy. The submarine strains to lift it from the mud. Then it becomes snagged on a tree limb. They maneuver the sub, but it feels almost as if the crate is held back by something dark and sinister from the past. Slowly and carefully, they work the crate free and raise it to just below the surface. Fricke hopes that the most important find at Lake Toplitz lies within his grasp. He believes it might be connected with the Serbian bank. 5 crates of valuable papers from Serbia disappeared at the end of the war. Could this be one of them? Working underwater to preserve its contents, Fricke opens the case. What he finds is baffling. A stone, probably used as ballast to sink the crate. He finds little else, except for a few scraps of paper, so small they're almost impossible to read. Why would anyone go to the trouble of sinking a crate of paper at an isolated end of Lake Toplitz? Fricke searches for clues about its origins. He finds the year 1942 printed on one paper. On another, he spots the name Dash, who was a German spy, sentenced to death in the USA in 1942. Another scrap contains strange drawings, cartoon figures, and a mysterious symbol. Disappointed at first, Fricke focuses his energy on a new investigation. He takes up a paper chase, meticulously scanning every scrap into his computer and searching for matches. An expert on typefaces dates the document from 1955 or later. Because this German letter wasn't standard until then. But that barely narrows down the hunt. It could be from one of millions of different publications. Fricke finds another clue, a handwritten 3-digit number, 157. In 1963, Famed Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal wrote, "Above all, however, we believe that in Lake Toplitz there are documents relating to the transfer of German capital, that is, the so-called list of depositories." Was this part of a list of secret bank accounts? If so, Fricker might be able to trace where the Nazis hid their stolen money. In his hunt for clues about what the Nazis dumped at the bottom of Lake Toplitz, Hans Fricker turns to the Vienna National Library. He searches through the periodicals. He works his way systematically through the magazines. After days of research, he finds the magazine that matches all of his scraps. It's an Austrian edition of Stern, dated January the 4th, 1958, just 1 year before that magazine launched its own search of Lake Toplitz. The figures are part of a cartoon. And the mysterious symbol that Fricker mistook for a code turns out to be part of a line drawing. The handwritten, faded number remains a mystery. Any remaining clues may still hide beneath the waters of Lake Toplitz.
We have asked the intelligence specialists in Germany and Austria what the Stern magazine discovery might signify. No one had a plausible answer. It even crossed our minds that it might be a joke, but who would transport a heavy container to the remote end of a lake in order to sink a case containing nothing but a Stern magazine? It just doesn't make sense. One of the shady SS men who took part in the illegal diving operation in 1963 still lives in Bonn today. 40 years on, we asked him about the affair, but his lips were sealed. It's as if there is a curse hanging over Lake Toplitz that causes such dark and mysterious tales to repeatedly ruin the reputation of this mountain lake. And of course, it lures those interested in such intrigues.
The underwater exploration company Oceaneering spent 6 weeks in the summer of 2000 combing every cubic meter of the lake bottom. Oceaneering successfully explored the Titanic, as well as other famous sites. But the submerged trees and other hazards of Lake Toplitz made for a difficult survey. The expedition cost millions of dollars, but came up empty-handed. The quiet, seemingly peaceful lake carefully guards its secrets. Rumors and whispered stories draw treasure hunters to its shores. Hans Fricker has explored and catalogued the entire body of the lake, yet he can't put the myths and legends to rest. As a scientist, he will always be fascinated by the lake. Originally, he came to Lake Toplitz as a biologist to plumb the depths of these waters, to explore unknown regions of the deep alpine lakes. It never occurred to him that he would become so involved in researching the weaponry and experiments of the German war machine, or that he would be drawn so far into the mysteries of Operation Bernhard. The lake's secrets may never materialize from the toxic soup that clouds the bottom. The fate of forged banknotes appears clearer. At the insistence of the Bank of England, the counterfeit bills were burned. But like so much else about Lake Toplitz, nothing ever seems to come to a peaceful end. a few of the forged pound notes escaped destruction. Today, they're highly sought after by collectors. Much else about the lake remains unresolved and unanswered. What drew Adolf Egner into the depths and to his doom? Is it true that crates of stolen treasure, Serbian gold, or lists of secret bank accounts lie under tons of rock on the bottom? And what else might lie in the hostile deep among the debris of the Devil's dumping ground?